right place. Stay tuned and be sure to join the millions of others who have benefited from BiggerPockets.com, your home for real estate investing online.
What's going on, everyone? It's Brandon Chandler, host of the Bigger Pockets podcast, here in the Sea Shed with my buddy, David Green. David, how's the book selling? I know Sold came out a few weeks ago. How's that doing?
Sold is selling. It's actually really cool. I talked to the publishing coordinators, and they said this is the most orders they've ever had for a book launch in the history of Bigger Pockets Publishing. And based on what I'm seeing from Amazon sales, they're already ready to order another 5,000. It's only been out for like a week or two. So,
look at you!
And I didn't think it would, because
I didn't think it would either. It's a book for real estate agents.
Yeah.
So I thought, like, well, our audience is real estate investors. Are they going to buy them for the agents? It looks like they are.
That's exactly the key. What you just said is Bigger Pockets audience is so awesome that they've been buying this book to give to their real estate agents as a thank you when the house closes, or hey, I care about your career. I just want to give you something that will help push you forward, and it's done incredible because of that.
You know, in fact,
I'm going to do a voice note or a text on my phone right now to my assistant.
text Bell. Hey, let's order David's book and send it to Jason and Patrick. I got my agent in Washington and agent here in Maui.
So we just showed people how to buy a gift for someone to make them like you. How to leverage a personal assistant to do your work for you. Right? How to be productive with 3 seconds and during a podcast.
In the middle of a podcast. All right, good stuff. All right, with that said, let's talk about today's show. Today's show is with a guest that we've had on the show before, but we went a different route with him today. Really good stuff. Bryce Stewart. So Bryce was the guy, if you remember back in the day, who had the really cool analogy that we talk about all the time about vacuuming your truck. If you don't know what that means, you'll hear about it in today's show. But vacuuming your truck is that guy. And we cover a lot of stuff today, like how he bought basically 21 units for basically no money down. He doubled his cash flow while actually reducing the geographic area of his portfolio. Like he shrunk down to one specific spot. Very, very cool. And then he even, you guys are going to think it's hilarious. Brent's a funny dude. He pulls out a guitar and he serenades us with a song on the podcast today. You're going to love it. It's about something every landlord should know. He's super passionate about it, so he wrote a song just for us today. I think the first time it's ever happened on the podcast. So stay tuned for all of that. But before we get to it, let's get to today's quick tip. Quick tip is buy books for people in your life. It doesn't have to be a Bigger Pockets book, but books are such a great thing. Like we talk about the importance of like giving gifts to people. Books are cool because what you do is you buy the book and then you like write a note on the front cover or inside or on a post-it note. It's like, hey, I thought you would like this book because A, B, and C. It just shows that you put thought into something that you get for somebody. So the quick tip is start building relationships with people by buying them books and then include a note with it. It's just a really, really good way to build relationships.
David Alexander bought me Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink, and it changed my life, and then it changed my business's life, and as we started incorporating that, it affected the way that I speak on the podcast, and then it led to us getting Jocko Willink to be on the podcast.
Yeah, that's cool.
If he would have said, hey, you should check out this book, I'd have said, okay,
Yeah.
and never would have done it again.
Yeah.
But he actually went out of his way to put it in my hands, and it changed my life. So now I think of him every single time I think of that thing. It's an awesome way if you want to impact people's lives positively.
All right, folks, that's it. Let's get into today's show. Again, I think you're going to love this, so grab a pen and paper, take some notes today, and make sure you listen for the song. You're going to love it. This is our interview with Bryce Stewart. Bryce, welcome back to the Bigger Pockets podcast, man. It's been a long time coming. I've been excited to get you back to what you've been up to. What have you been up to?
Thanks so much. I'm really excited to be back on. I've had a lot going on in the last, I guess, 2.5, nearly 3 years since you guys had me on. So I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, well, let's get into it. So maybe first you can, for those who didn't listen to your last episode, which, what number was that again? I know I have it written here somewhere, but
276.
276. So if they didn't, wow, we're on 430 something now. Great. So for those who didn't listen to that, can you give us a quick, 2-minute rundown on who you are, how you got into real estate, and what kind of your portfolio looked like when we last talked?
Sure. The brass tacks of this, I had been a 6th grade teacher in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and I went from being essentially about $50,000 in debt with a wife and young kids at age 27 to being completely retired at age 35 and having a portfolio that was delivering me around $10,000 in monthly passive income. So I was able to retire. The big takeaway that seemed to hit most people hardest from our first episode was a story I shared with you guys about vacuuming my truck as a sort of convenient and tidy parable for how to approach real estate investing. Is that ringing any bells for the two of you?
It is definitely ringing bells for me. I still actually give that analogy to people all the time. I just tell them that I invented it, not you. Just kidding.
I won't go through the entire story, but the point of it is this, that sell a truck, and it was overly complicated, and I had to decide that the very first step in selling my truck was to go and vacuum out the truck. Instead of being intimidated by the entire process of getting rid of a truck that I had a loan on, I just had to focus in on the first step being to go outside, get my shop vac, and vacuum the thing. And then the next day after that, take it to the car wash. And then the next day after that. And eventually it got to the point where I was able to sell it, but I never could have anticipated how it would go before I started taking those steps. And I think that's it's a good parable for investing in real estate, because a lot of times for the listeners who are on here, you've got a watermelon in front of you that you have to eat, and you keep telling yourself, my mouth is not big enough to swallow this entire watermelon. And the answer is, well, you need a knife. Nobody can swallow an entire watermelon. You have to be able to cut it up into pieces that are bite-sized, or you'll never get it down. And you shouldn't eat the rind. Maybe that's a lesson in there too.
Probably. But you could try, but you might get some painful experiences out of it, which also relates to real estate. Sometimes you try stuff. I love that. I love both those pictures because they just show that people oftentimes don't take action because they can't see the full picture. I like to say the analogy I use often is like driving through the fog. You can't see the deer that's in the road 2 miles down the road, so people pull over to the side of the road. That would be ridiculous, but we do it all the time in other areas of life. But when you're driving, as long as you just keep moving down the road, you always can see a little bit further. And as long as you keep asking the question, what is the next step? What's the next logical step in this process? You're always going to get the answers that you want as you get through that. So I think it had a huge impact on me and hundreds of thousands of others.
Well, the good part about it is that it actually applies to every stage of your investing career, whether you're David Green, Brandon Turner, Bryce Stewart, or just starting out. That's something that everybody has some next step that's bite-sized, and we've talked ourselves into not taking it because we think it's too big. Or what often happens is this, I find. You run into some barrier, which is like a lack of knowledge barrier. You get to some point where you're like, I don't know what to do next, and then you freeze.
Yep.
So whether it's starting a fund, whether it is hiring an admin for a real estate business, whatever it is, you get to some point where you're like, I just don't know what to do next, and then you stop. And the key in continuing to go forward is finding out how to either get help or to break down what you do know into something that you can do next. So for the listeners who are out there, and I want to give value to everybody who's listening to this podcast today, and whether you're a beginning investor or like a seasoned investor, I'm hoping there's something from what we talk about today that you can really take away. And but in each case, it's going to be that you have to break it down and take the next step. I can give you an example from right after when we got off when we got off the call last time Brandon and David were interviewing me, and I asked you guys, I had 2 pain points at that point. One was, I'm doing all this work for these 22 units that I have. And yeah, it's great that I retired from teaching, but now I feel like I'm a janitor. And how do I get from being a janitor to being an actual real estate investor? The other pain point was that I owned 1 unit, a condo, that I was losing money on. That was my wife's and my first investment, and we were still losing about $300 per month on that condo. So that's what I was encountering at that point, was how do I become more passive in dealing with my portfolio, and how do I either get rid of or mitigate the damage from this cash hemorrhaging condominium?
Did you say that we gave you advice?
Yeah, you did.
All right.
You did.
I didn't know. I'm not usually one to give advice.
Well, I'll give a shout out right now. Both you recommended that I was contemplating joining M1, which is a mastermind group that a lot of real estate folks go into. And you both encouraged me to go ahead with it, that the risks were actually fairly small and the benefits would be huge. And that was 100% true. And then the second thing that you said is, take your own philosophy, Bryce, of vacuuming the truck, and let's apply it to the next steps. How can you get somebody to start doing the work that you say is annoying you? So I'm not sure if it was Brandon or Dave, but one of you said you can hire a high schooler to mow the lawns. You should stop doing that yourself. And that was that changed my mindset about it. And I really, the next day, I started going into, all right, how do I do the very next step for taking this on? I'll throw at you guys one. This is going to be mind-numbingly stupid, because sometimes I'm mind-numbingly stupid in how to get rid of the condo. I literally, the next day, and I should go farther. A month later, I had done what you said. I hired a guy to mow my lawns, and the first day that he was mowing my lawns, and I wasn't there, I sat at my computer. I was like, I need to get rid of this condo. How do I? It's losing me $300 a month, and it had been for 10 years. In my book, it was worth maybe $90,000 based on the income it was generating, and I still owed $110,000 on the note. So unless I was going to throw $20,000 at it, there was no way for me to unload that property. Is that making sense?
Yeah.
So I realized the taxes were fairly high for a one-bedroom condominium, and the HOA board had just sent out an email saying, if you'd like to get your taxes reassessed, here is our recommended attorney and appraiser to get a tax reassessment, or to appeal your tax assessment. And the problem was they both were going to charge $500, so it would cost me about $1,000 to pursue a tax reassessment.
Sure.
This for the listeners out there, I didn't realize at the time that this is true. Tax assessments are done differently in different states. In Pennsylvania, in the county where I am, the tax assessment stays the same even when the property changes hands. It was news to me that in some states, when you sell, they reassess the taxes at the new sales price. In Pennsylvania, at least in my county, that's not true. It's a static number until they do like an actual, they send somebody out, an assessor, to reassess it.
Yeah, my county in Grace Harbor did the same thing. Yeah, it was only reassessed every 5 years, and so like doesn't matter how many times it was sold in there, it was always just every 5 years. Yeah, simple.
Exactly. So where I'm at, you can count on, if you're looking at a deal, you can count on the tax assessment staying the same even when you acquire the deal. So, but I was frozen on, I didn't want to pay these guys $1,000 to do it, so I said, all right, how do I vacuum my truck? I don't know how to do or even if I can do a tax assessment appeal by myself. And I was super intimidated by that. I thought, I don't have a law degree, I don't know how to be an appraiser, how am I going to do that? And literally the very first step that I took was I said, I'm going to see if the phone number for the county assessment office is actually online. So this is going to seem really stupid, but Brandon, if you're willing to like transcend your current self and be myself 2.5 or 3 years ago and just be stupid enough to go through this, I think it maybe would benefit people who are listening and who can see this to actually look at this. These are the kinds of little steps you have to take. So my property is in Northampton County, Pennsylvania. So I just Googled Northampton. Yeah, you're going to want the assessor or assessment office.
All right. County assessor and the property records.
Yeah.
Let's go here.
Click on that.
All right. So that's in
So right
Northampton
there.
County, Pennsylvania. Yep.
That's exactly right. And right there, the biggest thing on the page is a phone number to call the assessment office. And if it was still during the hours, I would actually have us call the assessment office so you can get somebody on the phone. But I called and I just got somebody on the phone and I said, hey, is it possible for me, an individual owner, to appeal my tax assessment? Or do I have to hire an attorney and an appraiser to do that? And the woman on the other line said, no, an individual person can do it. All you need to do is download this form, and you need to send us a $25 check, and you'll get a court date to show up and to do a reassessment. So I stayed on, this is what happens a lot of times. She said, the form is on X page on our website. And I was tempted to say, okay, thanks, have a nice day. But instead, what I said is, hey, I'm really not that smart. Can you stay on the phone with me until I'm sure that I have that actual document, like link downloaded, and I'll tell you when I'm done with it? So this woman, thank goodness she stayed on with me. She helped me navigate through the site, and I found the form and I downloaded it. And literally, and I hung up with her and I printed it out, and then I didn't do anything else for like 3 days. It sat there on my printer and the form didn't move at all. this sounds really silly, but honestly, this is real estate investing. It's
Yeah.
little stupid stuff like printing out a form and letting it sit there and collect dust. It was 3 days later, I picked it up and said, the only thing on here that I know how to fill out is my name and the property address that I want to get reassessed. And then it was asking for like information for other comparable properties that essentially when you're going for an assessment appeal, you have to demonstrate there are other properties that are the same as mine that have a lower tax assessment.
Yep.
And my property should be assessed at the lower value that these comparable properties are assessed at. I'm hoping you guys are following so
I am.
far. It hasn't been too complicated.
I got it.
Great. So I was like, I don't know what properties to use. What am I supposed to use? What counts as a comp? Now, thankfully, I had a condominium that there was other condos in the complex that were identical to mine, same exact square footage. And I went through and I found the 3 of them that had the lowest tax assessment of the entire condo complex. And then I looked for the ones that had sold most recently. I wrote them all down. I had some backups that I went in, and when I showed up for I went to the courthouse, they gave me like a court date. You go in, they call your like case number, you stand up, they put your hand on a Bible, you swear in.
Really?
Yeah, in front of like there's like a panel of 7 attorneys or judges or whatever that are there. And then there's like a representative from the county whose job it is to sort of argue that the current assessment should stay the same. And they're kind of like against you that you're arguing it should be lower. So I stood up and I said, yeah, I own this property. Look, during the 07-08 crash, this condominium complex tanked and there were a lot of foreclosures. And to this day, no one can get a Fannie Mae approved loan to buy one of these condos because it doesn't meet Fannie Mae's loan guidelines to buy a place. And I started explaining this, and get this, all the attorneys, they all start taking notes on what I'm saying. Like, I'm explaining to them why it won't get approved for Fannie Mae loans, and they're like, wait, say that part again. What did you say about foreclosure ratios and owner-occupant to investor ratios? I'm like, yeah, if there's too many investors, Fannie Mae's not going to write an owner-occupant to come in. So I get done, and they're all like, okay, sounds good. And then the county representative stands up and goes, yeah, he's right. And then just sits back down. So, and then maybe like a week and a half later, I get a letter from the county saying, your taxes have been reduced by, I think it was $1,000 a year. It was like 30%.
Yeah.
Down to where it should be. Now, that was me essentially getting paid $1,000 that year for putting in, I don't know, a total of an hour and a half of work. But it was comprised of really stupid little steps. Calling a woman at the county, telling her I'm a stupid person, please walk me through getting this form. And then going really slowly through filling out the form until I got that done. And that was something that that paid me $1,000 every year after that, or it mitigated my costs by $1,000 every year after that, just because I was willing to do that action once. And when you're a real estate investor, there's a lot of those things that if you just push the boulder up to the plateau, the effort ends and you get to reap the benefits of it longer.
I love this concept, and I think when you were on the show the first time, it really started my mind working toward this idea that, and I say it now on the podcast all the time, and I really think you were probably the origin of this, is that every difficult thing in life is really just, there's nothing hard. I would say there's nothing hard. It's just steps that you haven't defined yet or practiced enough. In other words, then I would say, everything can be broken up into 5-minute tasks. Everything. Building a nuclear bomb is a series of 5-minute tasks. It's connect this wire there, install this piece of plutonium there. Everything could be broken up into 5-minute or less tasks that a fourth grader could do in almost every way, in almost everything. And so when you take that time to really ask, well, what is the most important next step? What is that next thing? What is the vacuum my truck moment in this thing? All of a sudden you realize you could go and build a gigantic real estate fund, or you could go and buy property out of state, or you could do a number of, you could go to the moon. It's so freeing to realize that it's not difficult, it's just steps. And so once you define what those steps are, you're going to figure it out. And once you practice them, then it becomes easy. Then it becomes who you are. And you and I would go buy a duplex tomorrow. It wouldn't be a big deal because we've done the steps. It's fine.
Yeah, and you stop telling yourself you have to eat the entire watermelon.
Yes. Yeah.
It's time to cut it up.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, the one difference is you said a fourth grader could do it. I've taught fourth graders before. Remember, I was a teacher. Here's the difference. Fourth graders will ask for help.
Yep.
We get to a point where we don't, like, when I was on the phone call with that woman, I was tempted to say, yeah, I understand this, and I found the form, even before I had found that form, because I didn't want her to think I'm slow, I'm stupid, or whatever.
Yeah.
I was tempted to be like, yeah, I'll find it, or I'm good. Instead, I said, I'm not that smart, please help me find the form.
Yeah.
So one other thing I've done in the last 3 years since I was on your guys' show is I mentored a 20-year-old who came to me after the show. Now, he was a friend of a friend. It wasn't just some random thing, but he heard the podcast episode, and he came to me. He said, hey, we both know this person, and now I know you. Will you mentor me? I want to be a real estate investor. 20 years old. He opted not to go to college, which for him was the right choice. It wasn't the right time to incur debt, and he wanted to start investing in real estate. So, no offense to you guys, he attended a few of the webinars and a few of the how to buy real estate stuff, but it was still at 20 years old. It was a lot of it was still over his head, and it wasn't dumbed down enough to the point where it was like, hey, go and get this form in this particular county and go and do this. So it's really helpful when you're starting out in real estate that you have somebody who you're talking with or who you're with who can kind of define the parameters for you and give you an ecosystem in which to be stupid and ask really stupid questions.
Somebody who's vacuumed their truck before.
Exactly, yeah. I'm like, I know how to go and get your first triplex because I've done that. So for this guy and for a lot of your listeners out there, the recommendations I gave him after I started realizing, okay, he really doesn't know that much. I explained to him about how a refinance works and how a purchase loan works. For those of you who are just listening and don't know how that works, look, this is going to sound really dumb, but you have to start with the idea that you're taking on debt, and maybe you guys, again, maybe you don't get to this level of stupidity in the normal podcast, but this is how I roll. But you got to understand, when you're taking and borrowing money from somebody, let's pretend it's, I don't know, that we're cavemen, but we have money, and Brandon wants to borrow $100,000 from me, and he comes to me and says, can I borrow $100,000? And he says, I have a really good business idea. I say to Brandon, look, I'm sure your business idea is great, but I need some collateral for my $100,000. I'm not just going to give it to you and hope you succeed in business. That's not really very smart of me. So, if Brandon says to me, okay, I have a handful of seashells, I will give you, and if I don't return your $100,000, you can keep my seashells. I'm going to say, no way.
Yeah.
That's stupid. Why? Why is that a bad deal for me? As the person loaning the $100,000.
There's not a lot of value in seashells.
Exactly right. That collateral is not worth the $100,000 that I'm giving you. In order for that to be a good deal for both me, who's lending it to Brandon, and for Brandon, he has to give me something as collateral that's either worth equal to or more than the amount of money that I'm giving him, so that if things go sideways in his little business endeavor, I'm not out $100,000. I can at least keep the collateral and go liquidate it to get my $100,000 back. Okay, when you're approaching real estate investing, that's actually the first concept that you have to understand is, when you're using, at least if you're using a mortgage, you have a loan with a bank. The bank wants to make sure that the collateral for the loan is worth at least what they're giving you, and preferably a lot more than what they're giving you, so that if things go sideways, they keep the collateral and they can pay back the loan. That's the first part you have to understand. The second part you have to understand in real estate investing is this, and this is really key because I keep running into people who want to